Hello, everyone, and thanks very much for tuning into my talk today. I'm Dr. Miranda Sherratt-Bado, based at Queen's University, Belfast. The title of my talk is This Must Be the Place, Mapping Contemporary Women's Writing from the North of Ireland. Firstly, I'd like to thank the team at EastSide Arts, especially the manager, Rachel Kennedy, and Jan Carson, the symposium curator, for inviting me to participate in this exciting and timely event. I'm honoured and delighted to take part alongside this distinguished lineup of presenters. Many thanks also to the Arts Council of Northern Ireland for supporting this symposium and for funding my current research. The Arts Council are tremendous champions of women writers, and I'm grateful for their continued support, which has been a vital resource for so many in the North throughout the pandemic. This year marks the Northern Ireland centenary, a controversial moment in the decade of commemorations. The theme of today's symposium, a showcase of writing from Northern Ireland, presents us with an opportunity to reflect on Northern culture 100 years on from the contentious historical event of the state's inception. The Brexit crisis has made the task of measured reflection on Northern history and cultural heritage even more urgent. The image that I've chosen for the cover slide features Belfast artist Rita Duffy's 2017 textile installation, Soften the Border, a yarn bombing of the borderland between counties Fermanagh and Cavan, which provides a useful visualization of the way in which women's art both comments on and transforms the cultural landscape. Accordingly, my talk will explore a central question. How have the contributions of contemporary women writers changed the cultural landscape of Northern Ireland? To answer this question, I will present an overview of the field of contemporary women's writing from all across the North, including authors from the Northern diaspora. This talk will encompass a variety of writers and texts and include readings from a selection of short excerpts to give a flavour of their work. Specifically, I will cover writings that are set in the North or that feature Northern characters. For reasons of time and space, today I will focus on narrative modes of Northern fiction, television, and film, which have experienced stylistic and formal innovations that are resonating with a worldwide audience. Historically, and more recently, as we've seen with the centenary commemoration materials, the images and words of male writers have been used to represent the state on the island of Ireland, as though only men can be the storytellers of a place or a culture. As a counterpoint, this talk will focus on women writers as representatives and chroniclers of the North. How have they shaped our story in the making in Northern Ireland? A central topic of discussion for today's symposium is the question, what makes contemporary writing from Northern Ireland so distinctive? In response, I'd like to call attention to the fact that Northern women writers in particular are having a moment. This has been the most salient aspect of Northern writing in the 21st century. I'm often asked why there's been a significant surge in the publication of women from Northern Ireland in the past 23 years since the Good Friday Agreement, and why it took such a long time for women authors to step into the spotlight. My answer is it's not that women weren't writing before the agreement, it's that a majority of women in the North weren't being seen, heard, or read. A major cultural milestone during the Troubles was the appearance of the female line, Northern Irish Women Writers, which was published in Belfast by the cross-community Northern Ireland Women's Rights Movement in 1985. It was the first ever anthology of Northern women writers. The editor, Ruth Carr, née Hooley, was pioneering in her approach. She brought many Northern women into print for the first time and curated an anthology that is exuberantly cross-genre. A pioneering collection, the female line was especially remarkable because it was published amidst the Troubles, which, as Carr points out, were never very far from the door. Anthologies are integral components of the literary canon, and the female line was the first step towards female canon making by the women of the North. During the peace process, the literary scene in Northern Ireland stayed closed off and dominated by men, as it had been during and prior to the conflict. Many women I've spoken to said the lingering tensions and residual hypermasculine atmosphere meant that the North remained unaccommodating to women's voices. However, with the unfolding of a tentative peace came a gradual opening out of the North and an ability to hear new and other voices. It also enabled vital cross-border connections, which were not possible beforehand due to the hard border. Today, there are considerably more artistic platforms for Irish women writers, North and South. Furthermore, Northern women's voices now carry across the globe and reach international audiences. Circumstances for women have also changed with the passing of historic legislation in 2019, which legalized human rights compliant abortion and same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland. Notably, these votes were made by Westminster rather than Stormont, as Northern Ireland still did not have a functioning government. The move came on the back of decades of work by activists, many of whom were Northern women. So, in light of the centenary, what exactly is our story in the making when told from female perspectives? How are women writing or rewriting narratives of the North in the contemporary period? This talk will explore how women authors are redrawing the cultural landscape and projecting new images of the North to the rest of the world. I will define the contemporary period as the last 23 years, from the Good Friday Agreement to the present. In order to understand the current state of Northern women's writing, as well as its future, we must first remember to look back at its history. As Ruth Carr wrote in her introduction, the female line is both handed down and self-written. Correspondingly, a welcome development that we've seen in the past 2 decades is a growing interest in tracing a female literary lineage in the North. A significant aspect of this process is the reissuing of texts by Northern women that are out of print, previously unpublished, or languishing in the archives. There has been a flurry of reprinting of Northern women's writing throughout the contemporary period. It is crucial that this feminist recovery work continues in order to make these writings more widely available to both general readers and scholars. I will now take a brief look at some of these reissued texts. In 2002, the New York Review of Books reissued 2 Black comedies by Bangor County Down writer Caroline Blackwood, Great Granny Webster and Corrigan, which were published in the 1970s and 80s. Great Granny Webster was a bestseller, and it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 1977. This Gothic big house novella tells us much about life for women in the Ulster Ascendancy, for it is a transgenerational story of the women in a prominent family living, as Blackwood states, in a rainy province in an immense grey isolated house that was so cold you had to put on an overcoat to walk through its halls. In 2012, Northern editor James Doyle founded Turnpike Books with the mission of publishing new editions of a series of books that will build into a history of Northern Ireland's 20th century literature. Between 2015 and 2019, Turnpike reissued 4 novels by mid-century Belfast writer Janet McNeill. McNeill is a sharp critic of Northern society, and her incisive wit and ironic humour suffuse her intricate portraits of her Protestant middle-class contemporaries. Her novels from the 1950s and 60s give voice to the underrepresented figure of the middle-aged Northern woman and demonstrate the ways in which her surrounding patriarchal environment becomes internalized. In 2018, Turnpike reissued Belfast-born author Linda Anderson's 1986 novel Cuckoo, about a Troubles migrant who flees Northern Ireland for London. In Cuckoo, Anderson surveys the cartographies of Troubles-era Belfast, the Falklands War, and a supposedly multicultural Britain during the Thatcher era. The personal and political intersect in this tale of motherhood and survival for a Northern woman moving through a world where, as she remarks, nothing was inviolate, no room, no womb, no indifference. In the 2010s, major London publisher Faber and Faber reissued and rejacketed the entirety of interim-born author Deirdre Madden's catalogue. So far, Madden has written 8 novels in total, which were originally published between 1986 and 2013. This is a hugely significant gesture by Faber, as it showcases Madden's substantial output and longevity. Faber described her as one of Irish fiction's most outstanding talents, and yet Madden remains an inexplicably underrated writer. Deirdre Madden's work is important because she is one of the few writers to depict the experiences of rural Northern Catholic women during the Troubles. She's been hailed by the Irish Times as a pivotal voice in Northern Irish writing, her understated yet complex fictions often touching on the religious and political turmoil of the North. Returning to the importance of anthologies, in 2016, the 1985 volume The Female Line was relaunched as an ebook by Herself Press, a feminist digital press run by Belfast-based editor Avril Buchanan. Also in 2016, Dublin writer Sinead Gleeson edited The Glass Shore, short stories by women from the north of Ireland, an anthology which traces the historical arc of Northern women's short stories from the turn of the century to the present. The book features stories by 10 deceased writers, as well as 15 new stories by current authors. Gleeson performs what she terms literary archaeology, uncovering work by women who were previously overlooked or marginalized and placing them alongside contemporary writers. The following year, in 2017, the anthology Female Lines, New Writing by Women from Northern Ireland, which I co-edited with Linda Anderson, was published by New Island Books with funding from the Arts Council of Northern Ireland. This anthology is a sequel to the original 1985 collection, The Female Line, and in the spirit of its vibrant feminist predecessor. In Female Lines, we trace the lineage of the original anthology and follow its example by presenting a mosaic of new work by contemporary women. The book showcases the work of 33 Northern women, including experienced and newer writers, and features short stories, flash fiction, extracts from plays and a novel, photographs, poetry, memoir, and essays. In 2019, Dura Press published Belfast Stories, an anthology of short stories co-edited by Paul McVeigh and Lisa Frank, which includes an eclectic mix of emerging and established writers with a close connection to Belfast. McVeigh explains the importance of representing Belfast voices that we still don't see so much in anthologies, namely those of queer, working class, disabled, immigrant, and emigrant lives. In Shannon Yee's The Brightening Upside, a new mother and Chinese-American immigrant considers the future her baby will inherit in her adopted hometown of Belfast. Yee uses humor to address local prejudices as her protagonist attempts to navigate a city that is not always welcoming of her identity. Her narrator comments wryly, "Progress is evidenced by the artisan coffee served tepid and trendy on pressed ply in concrete-floored, cathedral-quartered coffee shops run by nouveau Christians who tolerate the gays." Despite her initial skepticism, however, the narrator gradually begins to feel more at home in Belfast, and she reflects, "Hope, it appears in the margins when nobody's looking." Belfast Stories pays homage to the contemporary city in all its vivacity, multiplicity, and complexity, and chronicles the lived reality of urbanites whose stories are often omitted from anthologies of Irish literature. In another kind of Belfast story, 2018 marked the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, and later that year, Ardoyne-born writer Anna Burns made history as the first author from Northern Ireland to win the prestigious Booker Prize for her novel Milkman. The setting is an unnamed city that is at once Belfast and not Belfast, as the physical topography is overlaid by that of the narrator's consciousness. Burns examines the effects of the psycho-political atmosphere of the Troubles on her adolescent protagonist, who's called simply Middle Sister. She attempts to evade the sexual advances of Milkman, a married, middle-aged renouncer of the state. The book chronicles a period of 2 months during which Milkman preys upon the narrator, grooming her to become his mistress. Anna Burns gives voice to the women who endured unspeakable gendered violence during the Troubles, making a powerful and necessary feminist intervention into the literary legacy of the conflict. Milkman repeatedly materializes out of nowhere because he's an embodiment of the persistent threat of sexual violence that is matrixed within the narrator's environment. He's also part of the ubiquitous surveillance culture in this conflict zone. Once Middle Sister and Milkman are spotted together, the community automatically labels her a paramilitary groupie. The neighbors decide to inform her mother. "Ach, you know, neighbor," said the neighbors, "the one in the background, the one who does all that stalking, that tracking, all that shadowing and tailing and profiling, the one who gathers the information on the target and then hands it to the triggerman who..." "Baby Jesus," cried Ma, "and you're saying my girl's involved with this man?" She grasped the arms of her chair. "He's not that Milkman, is he? The one of the van, that wee white van, that nondescript ship-shifting..." "Sorry, neighbor," said the neighbors. They then said that at least my lover was a renouncer of the state and not a defender of the state. Something to be grateful for. Milkman is part of the proliferation of post-conflict writing by women about the troubled inheritance of the North following the 1998 agreement. Tara West grew up on the Rathcoole estate on the outskirts of Belfast, and her 2002 debut novel, Fodder, is a satirical send-up of the New North. West portrays a teenage misfit called Cookie, whose mother, a member of a punk band, goes missing from their loyalist housing estate. Cookie sets out to find her, determined to settle some old scores and wage his own private war against the powers that be. East Belfast writer Wendy Erskine's debut collection, Sweet Home, was shortlisted for the Edge Hill Short Story Prize. It portrays a working class corner of the East, where the word community remains a loaded term. In Erskine's story To All Their Dues, Mo has just opened a beauty salon when she arrives to find that the front window has been broken by a shiny red snooker ball that was thrown through it. Not long afterwards, a local hard man named Kyle shows up. Erskine writes, "He spread himself out in one of the seats. 'You see, it's like this,' he began. 'It's all about community. Communities don't run themselves. Businesses like yours, they're vulnerable. You see what I mean? There's a lot of people out there who are not nice people, and all we are really doing here, if I'm being honest, is offering you our help as a member of the community.'" "I know what community means," said Mo. "You do," said Kyle. "I know exactly what community means," said Mo. EU Prize shortlisted Belfast writer Rosemary Jenkinson's short story collections, Contemporary Problems, Aphrodite's Kiss, Catholic Boy, and Lifestyle Choice 10 milligrams, contemplate the long shadow cast by the Troubles across generations. In her story Bomb Dust from Lifestyle Choice, Jenkinson observes that the residue of the past impinges upon the present, sitting there like an unexploded bomb. In her tale, this notion is symbolized by the dusty old cardboard box left out on the kitchen table by Jacob's family when he returns home years after being put out of the Schenkel by a local paramilitary unit, which forced him to start a new life across the water. Jacob has spent years trying to forget about the place and the people he comes from. The box on the table contains letters and memorabilia belonging to his late grandfather, a legendary paramilitary bomber for whom he is named. Jacob recalls, the reason he'd had to leave the Schenkel was because he'd been talking at meetings on the other side of the peace wall, telling them he wanted to live in a drug-free, fearless community. Some of the UVF objected to him talking to Sinn Féin, jealous of his fame. So what if I talk to them? He'd retorted, I'm only doing what you've been doing the past 20 years behind closed doors. But they're using you for your name, they argued, and he had to admit it was true. The grandson of a notorious UVF killer was media gold dust to Sinn Féin. Lie low for a bit, Tommy had said at the time. Let the dust settle. But the trouble was the dust took too long to settle in these parts. Even over the graves, it still wouldn't settle. Wasn't it all mad, he thought to himself. Jacob's return forces him to reckon with the past that has haunted his memory and circumscribed his movements for years. At the end of the story, he decides to start anew. The thought came to his mind. He would throw out that box, slough off that past forever. He walked home through the streets, luminiferous with white snow dust, back to the Schenkel. Anointed with flecks of newly fallen white snow, Jacob feels cleansed of the bomb dust that had blanketed his memory and smothered his sense of identity. Coming-of-age narratives also feature prominently in recent Northern women's writing, where the troubles either appear at the forefront of the story or unnamed in the background. The Irish Times describes Derry native Susanna Dickey's debut novel, Tennis Lessons, as a clever, odd, and intimate tale of a Northern childhood. Her psychologically complex Bildungsroman is told entirely from the second-person point of view, and it charts a young woman's coming of age in a series of vignettes from the ages of 3 to 28. Dickey reveals that the disjointed structure was a conscious decision because, she states, I'm always thinking about what's happening in the places where there are no words. Another debut from a Derry writer, Geraldine Quigley's novel, Music, Love, Drugs, War, portrays a summer of friendship and violence in her home city from the different perspectives of a group of teens set against the backdrop of the post-punk scene and paramilitarism. The Guardian describes it as a clever, multiple narrative account of teenage kicks and sectarian strife in early 1980s Northern Ireland. Michelle Gallen grew up in the border town of Castledurg in County Tyrone, and her protagonist also lives near the border. Her hilarious debut novel, Big Girl, Small Town, is told from the perspective of Magella, a young woman who sardonically records the everyday events in her hometown, which she observes from her post at the Chipper. It was shortlisted for Newcomer of the Year at the Irish Book Awards and for Best Debut at the Costa Novel Awards. Gallen explains that the novel is also a portrait of a woman with undiagnosed autism, noting that the female presentation of autism is an underexplored experience in Northern writing. However, the book never makes explicit that Magella is autistic, and we never learn exactly why Magella's dad has disappeared, though we understand it is connected to the Troubles. Gallen writes, Magella's ma said he went to America to escape internment after his involvement with something he called civil resistance, which, from what Magella understood, wasn't the Raw, but something that led down the road to the Raw. Magella was hazy on the exact details as the stuff wasn't covered in history class and everyone spoke about it in mutters while looking sideways as if they were under surveillance. Her dad only got 1 year at the skyscrapers business before Magella's granddad died after getting a hiding in internment. The Brits had released him from Lankesh before he died. Magella had initially understood this to be an act of kindness, but had it explained to her that dying at home relieved the authorities of a whole lot of paperwork. The novel is set in 2005, and it depicts the milieu of a border town's divided community in the post-peace process period. Magella grew up during the Troubles, and she reflects, while she was at school, there were only the riots around the Orange Marches to look forward to in the run-up to summer, or the odd bomb or gun attack for a bit of excitement. Every now and then, an American newspaper or TV crew would come and stand on the bridge where Magella was now. The tossed castle in the background, one foot on the prod side, one foot on the take side, an ironic symbol of a town divided. Giving a monologue on the Troubles while people restrain the likes of Francie King from diving into the shot to give the fingers. The town had to make do with hosting the PhD students who'd come and spend days trying to get to know the post-conflict community, trying to dig up the sort of memories that people knew were best left buried. Another narrative about female coming of age during the Troubles is the sitcom Derry Girls, which premiered on Channel 4 in 2018 and became an overnight global sensation. Derry-born writer Lisa McGee created this uproarious and heartwarming comedy, which is set in her hometown during the peace process in the 1990s. The show explores how a group of teenage friends navigate the challenges of school as well as the Troubles. In the finale of the first series, Erin guest edits the school newspaper and decides to publish an anonymous student's essay entitled The Secret Life of a Gay Teenager, in spite of headmistress Sister Michael's censorship. Erin's best friend Claire wants no part of it, ostensibly because she's worried that their defiance of Sister Michael would go on their permanent record. When the issue is published, however, it emboldens Claire to come out as the author of the essay. Erin tells Claire, Michelle's running around saying it's her, that she wrote the story, that she's the wee lesbian. As if, like, there'd be more chance of it being you. It is me, Claire replies. No, I mean, I'd be less surprised if it was you. It is. No, it's not, but if it was, Erin, it is me. I'm the wee lesbian. I said you are, Claire. I'm not joking. You're a lesbian? I've never been brave enough to say it out loud before, but I think that's why I wrote the story, and then it all got too real. I got too scared, but now, well, you've made me realize that it's all okay. Don't blame me. What? You fancy girls? Well, that's sort of an entry-level requirement, Erin. I think I'm getting broke. Do you mind? I'm trying to come out to you. Well, don't come out. Go back in. I don't want to go back in. Oh, I'm sorry, Claire, but I'm just not interested in you. Not like that. Not interested in you like that. Look at this state of you. Oh, come off it. Your arrogance is staggering, Erin. Well, you know what else is staggering? Your gayness. I really thought you'd understand. In this scene, writer Lisa McGee explains that she always wanted to tell a very real teenage story in the mix of it all, and someone not being able to say who they are is a horrible thing. Erin thinks of herself as very liberal and worldly, but actually she can't handle it. I think it's how a lot of people would react at that age. But it was very hard for someone at that age, in that place, to come out. Moving on to another Derry girl. In 2020, Coleraine-born writer Maggio Farrell became the first author from Northern Ireland to win the Women's Prize for her breathtaking novel Hamnet, a story of William Shakespeare's wife and their lost son. Out of the 8 novels that Maggio Farrell has published so far, just one is set in her native north of Ireland. Turning away from the urban post-conflict narratives and towards life in the rural Northwest, I'd like to touch on O'Farrell's 2016 novel, This Must Be the Place, which is set just across the border in a quiet valley in Donegal. It was shortlisted for Book of the Year at the Irish Book Awards and for the Costa Novel Award. The novel depicts a French film star who's hiding away in deepest Donegal when she meets an Irish-American man who's retracing his roots. They fall in love and settle in Donegal, where their life together is as unpredictable as the local weather. In the opening scene, Farrell writes, "The day is typically unstable, the garden lush and shining, the branches weighty with still falling rain. I am at the back door, tobacco tin in hand, and I'm watching something in the trees, a figure standing at the perimeter of the garden. Another man. He's carrying a pair of binoculars and a camera. A woman comes around the side of the house. She has a baby on her back. She's wearing the kind of sou'wester hood usually sported by North Sea fishermen, and she's holding a shotgun. She fires into the air once, twice. The sound ricochets off the side of the house, off the flank of the mountain, then back again. A huge oral tennis ball bouncing about the valley. Far away, a figure is sprinting through the undergrowth. My wife turns around. She cracks the gun in the crook of her arm. She whistles for the dog. Ha, she says to me before she vanishes back around the side of the house. That'll show him. As I come through the front door, it's as if I'm entering another world. Instead of the grey drizzle at the back, a dazzling primrose-tinted sun fills the front garden. My wife, who just a moment ago was a dark, forbidding figure with a gun, a long grey coat, and a hat like death's hood, has shucked off the sou'wester and transmogrified back into her usual incarnation. It's as if I've stepped into another time frame entirely, as if I'm in one of those folk tales where you think you've been asleep for an hour or so, but you wake to find you've been away for a lifetime. I shake off this notion. The gun business needs to be dealt with right now. Since when, I demand, do we own a firearm? We don't, she says. It's mine. Here O'Farrell plays with the notion of Donegal as a site steeped in ancient Irish folklore by portraying a modern-day fairy tale of an Irish-American man who has fallen in love with a shape-shifting French movie star. In addition to the aforementioned post-conflict narratives and O'Farrell's re-envisioning of the rural Northwest and Donegal, the contemporary period has also witnessed exciting new developments by Northern women in a number of other areas, such as genre fiction, including crime fiction, science fiction, and magical realism. Notably, women have stepped onto the crime scene and broken up the notorious boys' club of Northern noir. In Claire Allen's Ask No Questions, Sharon Dempsey's Little Bird, and Claire McGowan's Paula Maguire series, past and present traumas collide in contemporary Northern Ireland, making for taut and twisty psychological thrillers. Women are also shaking up the otherworldly realms of Northern science fiction and magical realism. Carrick-Fergus-based author Joe Zebedee's dark and gritty novel Inish Carrig is set in a post-alien invasion Belfast. The contemporary period has also witnessed an efflorescence of magical realist fiction by Northern women. Jan Carson's short story collection Children's Children and her EU prize-winning novel The Firestarters, as well as Bernie McGill's collection Sleepwalkers and Roisin O'Donnell's Wild Quiet, feature magical realist tales that reflect the unsettled conditions in contemporary Northern Ireland, a society that is still working through the deep trauma of the Troubles. Born in England to Northern Irish parents, Roisin O'Donnell returned to Derry regularly throughout her upbringing. Her story Ebenezer's Memories from her 2016 collection Wild Quiet merges the actual events of the Troubles with magical realist elements. Her protagonist, Kathy, recounts a childhood visit to Derry in the mid-1990s when she and her brother accidentally discover a family secret hidden in the cupboard under the stairs during a game of hide and seek. Kathy and Jack are especially fond of their granddad's storytelling, and he sits them down to explain what they have seen. "Let me tell yous," Granddad whispered. "There's a monster living in that cupboard, and his name is Ebenezer. Ebenezer's hungry. I have to feed him newspapers every day, and other things." "What things, Catherine?" "Scary things, pet. Things we'd rather forget." "But do yous know what his favorite thing to eat is?" We shook our heads and Grandad leaned closer. His favourite snack is wee wens from England. So yous are not to go playing in that cupboard again. Understand? At first, O'Donnell's tale appears to be a fantastical children's story because it's framed as such through the mesmeric words of Cathy's granddad. However, its darker, magical realist framework becomes apparent when Cathy encounters the monster Ebenezer. She states, I kept recalling Granddad's words, things we'd rather forget. And I gradually began to realize that as well as being a great devourer of newspapers, Ebenezer was a fairly ferocious consumer of unwanted memories too. Ebenezer's hiding place below the stairs resembles a prison with its brass latch barring the door. It metaphorizes the location of the unconscious where suppressed memories are buried. Towards the end of the tale, Cathy takes pity on the ailing Ebenezer and lifts the latch on the cupboard door. She marvels, poor Ebenezer, it must have been terrible always to be this gassy. One belch and a kneecap shattered, one fart and a petrol bomb exploded across the foil. He wanted to leave Grandad's cupboard and breathe his memories back to their owners. The grotesque humor in this passage reflects Cathy's childlike understanding of the ways in which suppressed traumatic memory manifests corporeally. Ebenezer crosses the River Foyle, which splits the city down the middle, and goes unnoticed by the residents. However, once he returns their lost memories, the population of Derry experiences a seismic shift. Cathy recounts that people paused in their tasks. They looked up, each stunned by a painful recollection long since shed. Some looked over their shoulders, suspecting a supernatural presence, not believing that the human mind could, by itself, conjure such nightmares. O'Donnell portrays the supernatural presence of Ebenezer as a figuration of the living nightmare of the Troubles. She limns Ebenezer as a monstrosity that evolved out of the suppressed memories of the conflict. Historical fiction is another area where Northern women are making their mark. In her short story collection, Truth and Dare, Oma-born writer Martina Devlin presents highly atmospheric tales about trailblazing women writers, rebels, and activists who shaped Ireland, including remarkable Northern women such as Marianne McCracken and Alice Milligan. Port Stewart writer Bernie McGill's historical novels transport the reader back in time to the north of Ireland at the turn of the century. The Butterfly Cabinet is a lyrical, enthralling, and darkly haunting Ulster Big House tale based on the true story of death and deception. Her next novel, The Watch House, reimagines life on Rathlin Island when Marconi's telegraph arrives, bringing modernity and tragedy in its wake. Keeping in the realm of historical fiction, the Castle Welland-based young adult fiction writer Sheena Wilkinson revisits the period of the Irish Revolution from a Northern perspective in her novels Name Upon Name, Star by Star, and Hope Against Hope, which tackle events such as the Easter Rising, the First World War, and partition. Fellow YA author Lisburn-born writer Shirley Ann Macmillan's novels, The Unknowns and Every Sparrow Falling, are contemporary tales of Northern teens who don't fit into the mainstream youth culture. So, what's next for Northern women writers in 2021? I will close by talking about some forthcoming titles that you need to have on your radar and in your cart for pre-orders. Ballymena-born writer Jan Carson was shortlisted for the BBC National Short Story Award in 2020. She's written a series of interlinked stories set in a caravan park on the North Coast during a rainy summer, which are currently airing on BBC Radio 4 for the next several weeks, so be sure to tune in. In The Last Resort, quote, a caravan park on the Northern Irish coast is beset by a series of impossible thefts, forcing its disparate group of residents to come together to find their missing belongings. However, in this uncanny place where static caravans teeter on an eroding cliff edge overlooking the ocean, each holiday maker soon finds themselves similarly wavering between certainty and doubt, one world and the next, the past and the present, and even reality and fantasy. The full collection of Carson's stories will be published as The Last Resort by Doubleday in spring 2021, so watch this space. Dundonald native Stacey Gregg is an award-winning playwright as well as a screenwriter for TV and film, having written for such major outlets as Netflix, BBC, and RTE. Her feature film directorial debut, Here Before, is a sophisticated psychological thriller set in Northern Ireland and filmed in Belfast. It's produced by BBC Films in partnership with Northern Ireland Screen. The strong cast includes Andrea Riseborough, Eileen O'Higgins, John Joe O'Neill, and Martin McCann. Gregg also wrote the screenplay, which centers on a bereaved mother who begins to question her reality after new neighbors move in next door, and she thinks she recognizes their daughter. I asked Stacey Gregg what it means to her to have her feature film directorial debut set in her hometown of Belfast and focusing on women characters. And she replied, "It means a huge amount. I've been trying to get work made here in Northern Ireland for years, and I've always written about women, especially Northern Irish women. The specificity of the landscape and the cultural nuances of the characters give the film its distinctive atmosphere, which I'm excited about sharing." Furthermore, Gregg also revealed, "We're currently shooting a second feature film I've written with a female lead called Bally Walter in and around Belfast. So I feel like I'm really getting to tell local stories working with our great talent. It's a huge sense of pride, triumph, and responsibility to finally have the support and financial backing to do so." Both of Gregg's films are highly anticipated depictions of life in Northern Ireland, and this multi-talented writer is definitely one to watch, whether on the big screen, the small screen, or on stage. Rooney Prize winner Lucy Caldwell's latest short story collection, Intimacies, is due out in May. The subtitle is 11 More Stories, and the volume is a big sister to her 2016 collection, Multitudes, which was set on her home turf in East Belfast. She states in the acknowledgements for Intimacies that the stories are especially for all London, particularly Northern Irish. Intimacies charts the lives of Northern Irish women in London as they grapple with displacement, relationships, motherhood, and the ghosts of their former selves. In Caldwell's story, People Tell You Everything, a woman from the Northern diaspora returns home from London for the holidays. Since Christmas time has just passed, I thought it would be fitting to read this scene, which features an evocative description of Belfast city centre on Christmas Eve. The narrator states, "I'd been into the city centre that morning, the last minute messages my mother needed, posh cheese and biscuits for the neighbours coming round, extra rolls of wrapping paper. It was nothing I couldn't have got on the local high street, but I loved the almost empty bus into town, then walking the Christmas Eve streets, the knot of Goths in front of the city hall, refusing to concede to the festive season, the cigarette lighter men of my childhood, now that people hadn't the need of 5 lighters for £1, selling flashing Santa hats and antlers and bristling strings of tinsel instead. The birch trees on Donegal Place, slender and bare, drawn up in the clear air, waiting. Into Corn Market, where the bandstand used to be, and the ravaged old man with his megaphone and placards, impossible to tell if the end he was proclaiming was nigh or nigh. The sky that Christmas Eve morning was pale, the hills iron grey with cold, the city ingathered. Seagulls in from the loch, wheeling in circles, landing on lampposts and folding and unfolding their disdainful wings. The sense that despite themselves, they were restlessly waiting too. There was a hidden river running the length of High Street that once you knew about, you couldn't help but feel underfoot, the eastward tug of it. And I always ended my walk by following its path past the Albert Clock and into Customs House Square, where its culverts met the Lagan. But before looping back on myself and heading for the bus stop home, I'd paused to listen to a group of carol singers outside the Mayfair buildings. And as they sang the first tremulous lines of "O Little Town of Bethlehem," the feeling of everything just about to happen built and built until I almost couldn't bear it any longer. Caldwell's lyrical limning of the Belfast cityscape invites the reader to walk the city streets beside her protagonist and to share in her complex sense of home and away. The eastward tug of Caldwell's short stories demonstrates the push and pull dynamic between the London-based writer and her native East Belfast. Hollywood County Down native Louise Kennedy has been shortlisted twice for the Sunday Times Short Story Award, and her much anticipated debut collection, The End of the World is a Cul-de-sac, is due out this April. Her beautifully brutal, finely crafted, and visceral stories of women trapped in different circumstances will stay with you long after you read them. In another London Irish story, the protagonist of Kennedy's tale, In Silhouette, is a young northern shop girl working at a cosmetics counter in London during the Troubles in the 1980s. After work, she has a drink down the pub with Sean, one of the store's security guards. Kennedy writes, "He's the man who patrols the store for unattended bags, for accents like yours. He asks if you'd like a Pimm's. Oh yes, you'd say, as though you know what it is. It comes in a dimpled beer glass with chunks of cucumber and apple in it. I don't know whether to eat it or drink it, you say. And the woman at the next table stares at you and says something into her man's ear. She is wearing a Lady Di blouse like yours. He asks you questions as though he's reading them from a list. Do you come from a big family? I have an older brother and 3 wee sisters. What does your brother do? He is waiting for a job to come up. Sadie would smirk at your answer. He's 3 deaths away from going on hunger strike. Sean finishes his pint in one gulp and crosses the yeasty floral carpet to the gents. The woman at the next table is leaning into her man, pointing at the floor where you've put your white patent leather handbag. You take out a lipstick and drag it slowly across your mouth, pressing your lips together when you're done. Then you use it to write 4 big letters across the side of your bag. Sean appears hoking at the waistband of his trousers. You turn your handbag so the couple at the next table can read it. You've written B-O-M-B in shade 1981, English Rose. This story captures how Kennedy uses her signature salty style and Black humor to address the serious difficulties that are faced by Northern women. This stunning debut collection announces her as an important new voice in fiction from Northern Ireland. In conclusion, I'd just like to say that Northern women writers are the bomb. By the way, Louise Kennedy, if you're watching, the shade of lipstick pictured here is Max Factor's English Rose, just so you know. From post-agreement to the present, the contemporary period has witnessed a massive creative explosion by women authors who are shattering conventions and remapping the cultural landscape. By changing the narrative of Northern Ireland, women are writing our story in the making, and the world is watching. Thank you very much for your kind attention.